Be me, Elias Thorne, architect, or I was before I retired. Now I'm the guy with too much time and a passion for old things. Specifically, this historic neighborhood, Creekside Commons. My home sits on what was once the perimeter of the original estate. The property boasts a section of the old fieldstone wall, built sometime in the 1920s. I'm meticulous. I know the neighborhood bylaws, the city zoning codes, and especially the historic preservation ordinance, inside and out. I also maintain every inch of my property, including that wall, with care. My role, unofficially, became the quiet protector of common sense. Be not me, Belinda Higgins, our new Homeowners Association president, moved in less than a year ago from a bland, cookie-cutter development in the next county over. Her primary qualification for leadership seemed to be her relentless self-confidence and an SUV that took up 2 parking spaces. She possessed the unwavering belief that everything old was inherently bad and everything new, especially if it was cheap plastic, was a sign of progress. Her smile was always too wide, too bright, masking an iron will to enforce her own arbitrary vision. She immediately targeted anything that didn't fit her perfect, sanitized aesthetic, and my fieldstone wall was at the top of her hit list. Her reign of terror began subtly. First, it was the Great Mailbox Standardization Initiative. Belinda declared, unilaterally, that all mailboxes in Creekside Commons, a neighborhood built between the 1920s and 1970s, needed to be replaced with identical, black, plastic models. Her reasoning? Uniformity for better curb appeal. This was completely against the spirit, if not the letter, of our 50-year-old bylaws, which simply stated mailboxes should be well-maintained and architecturally harmonious. My house, a craftsman bungalow, had a lovely custom-built redwood box on a matching post. I attended the next HOA meeting, armed with photos of various mailbox styles across the neighborhood. I brought printouts from the original developer's prospectus, showing a diversity of architectural choices. I even had a copy of the specific bylaw section highlighted. I gently suggested a survey of residents' preferences and a phased, voluntary replacement program. Belinda just waved a dismissive hand, a sharp, metallic glint from her oversized ring catching the fluorescent lights. She announced, "Mr. Thorne, progress waits for no one. The new mailboxes are being installed next month. You will receive an invoice." She then moved on to the next agenda item without even a vote. My internal monologue was already documenting. Next, it was the front yard flora fiasco. Our bylaws allowed tasteful landscaping and encouraged native species. Many residents, myself included, had cultivated beautiful, low-maintenance native plant gardens. Belinda, however, decided that only manicured, weed-free lawns, edged with impatience, were acceptable. She began sending out violation notices for excessive natural growth. My own carefully curated garden, featuring coneflowers, asters, and native grasses, suddenly became a fire hazard in her eyes. It was utterly preposterous. I submitted a formal appeal, attaching scientific articles on xeriscaping and biodiversity. I cited the city's own Green Initiatives program, which encouraged native planting. I included a diagram of my yard, showing the spacing and type of every single plant. Belinda responded with a form letter stating, "The board's decision is final." She signed it with an illegible flourish. I began collecting every piece of correspondence, every email, every printed letter, every single photograph I took of my garden, dated and time-stamped. I had a feeling I'd need it. My patient fury was beginning to simmer. The third, truly egregious interaction involved the architectural authenticity audit. Belinda, having nothing better to do with her abundant free time, hired a consultant, her cousin, I later discovered, to audit every single home for non-conforming features. This consultant, a self-proclaimed expert in modern aesthetics, immediately flagged my historic fieldstone wall. This wall, a beautiful, aged structure, was explicitly mentioned in my property deed as part of the original estate's features. It was not merely a fence. It was a defining characteristic of the property and the neighborhood's history. Belinda sent me a final notice stating the wall was dilapidated, structurally unsound, and detracting from community appeal. It demanded I replace it with a standardized 6-foot PVC privacy fence within 60 days. This was not only a direct affront to the wall's historical significance, but also a violation of the city's historic preservation ordinance, which protected such structures. I immediately sent a certified letter back, politely but firmly informing her that the wall was a protected historic feature, structurally sound, regularly maintained, and that any alteration would require specific permits from the city's Historic Preservation Commission. I attached copies of the relevant city ordinances, a professional structural assessment I'd commissioned years ago, and my property deed. She never responded. Then came the breaking point. It was a Tuesday morning, bright and early. I was in my study, reviewing some old blueprints, when I heard the distinct sound of a jackhammer, followed by shouting. I looked out my window to see a crew of 3 men, none of whom I recognized, aggressively tearing into my fieldstone wall. They were already 3 feet onto my property, having ignored the visible survey markers I'd installed years ago. Belinda stood there, hands on her hips, directing them, a smug look of triumph plastered across her face. My blood ran cold, but my mind went into hyperfocus mode. I immediately grabbed my phone, started recording, and walked out. The crew had already removed a significant section of the historic wall, replacing it with a cheap, prefabricated white PVC panel. The contrast was jarring, offensive. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing?" I demanded, my voice low and steady despite the rage bubbling inside. Belinda turned, that condescending smile fixed in place. "Mr. Thorne, you ignored my notices. Your wall was an eyesore. The HOA is simply rectifying the situation. We are providing a much-needed upgrade to your property, free of charge." "Free of charge?" I repeated, incredulous. "You are illegally demolishing a protected historic structure and trespassing on my private property. You are 3 feet over my property line." I pointed to the survey stake clearly visible beneath a newly churned pile of dirt. Belinda scoffed. "Property lines are suggestive, Mr. Thorne. This wall needs to be flush with the common area. It's for the good of the community. You should be thanking me." She then turned back to the crew. "Keep going, gentlemen. Mr. Thorne just doesn't appreciate progress." The jackhammer roared back to life. I didn't argue further. I simply continued recording. I captured Belinda's face, the crew working, the destroyed wall sections, and the new, illegal PVC fence clearly on my property. I then calmly walked inside. My first call was to the city's Historic Preservation Commission. I spoke directly to Officer Ramirez, who I had already been in contact with regarding my general concerns about Belinda's intentions. I explained the situation calmly, providing the exact address and describing the ongoing damage. Officer Ramirez assured me he would be there within the hour. My second call was to my attorney. My third was to the local news station, anonymously tipping them off about a developing story involving historic preservation and a rogue HOA. My master plan began solidifying that very second. It wasn't just about the wall anymore. It was about exposing Belinda's hubris and incompetence definitively. I pulled out a fresh legal pad. Every interaction with Belinda, every demand, every dismissal, every threat had been meticulously documented. My home office was a war room. I had binders filled with copies of emails, certified letters with return receipts, photographic evidence with time and date stamps, and audio recordings of every single HOA meeting. I had even kept copies of the official meeting minutes where Belinda had refused to allow discussion or votes on her initiatives. I specifically cross-referenced the HOA bylaws, finding Article 7, Section C, Subsection 4. Major structural alterations to property boundaries require a unanimous vote of the Board of Directors and appropriate city permits. Belinda had done none of this. I found Article 12, Section A. Any work impacting historic elements of a property must first receive approval from the city's Historic Preservation Commission. Again, completely ignored. My attorney had reviewed my materials months ago, confirming my suspicions. He just told me to keep building the file. Now, the file was complete. I also had the specific clause in the Creekside Commons Declarations of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, Article 9, Subsection B, stating, "No improvements, alterations, or repairs which extend beyond the platted property line of a lot shall be made without the express written consent of the affected lot owner and the Board of Directors." Belinda had no such consent. and she had bypassed the entire board. I knew exactly who to call and exactly what evidence to present. It was all a matter of waiting for the city to act. The execution was swift and devastating. Officer Ramirez arrived exactly 45 minutes later, followed closely by a news van. He took one look at the partially demolished wall, the new PVC monstrosity, and Belinda, who was now turning a sickly shade of green. "Miss Higgins," Officer Ramirez stated, his voice stern, "you are in direct violation of City Ordinance 14-7 billion, Section 3, concerning the alteration of protected historic structures. You are also in violation of City Ordinance 12-5A regarding unauthorized construction on private property. This is a stop work order. Any further work will result in immediate arrest and substantial daily fines to the Creekside Commons Homeowners Association." The news camera zoomed in on the stop work order being taped to the new PVC fence. Belinda, still trying to project authority, turned to me, her face contorted. "Mr. Thorne, this is your fault. You incited this. You told me it was fine." She attempted to pin the blame. Her eyes darted wildly between me, Officer Ramirez, and the news camera. "Excuse me, Miss Higgins," I interjected calmly, pulling out my phone. "I believe I have documented every single interaction regarding this wall." I played the audio recording of our last conversation, specifically where I warned her about the historic designation and the need for city permits. I then pulled up the dated photographs showing my survey markers, undisturbed, right where her crew had started digging. Finally, I presented Officer Ramirez with a folder containing printouts of my certified letter to her, her lack of response, and the structural assessment report confirming the wall's integrity. I advised her repeatedly. She chose to ignore all warnings, bypass procedure, and illegally trespass on my property to destroy a protected historic landmark. Belinda looked absolutely stunned, her face paling further as the news reporter began asking pointed questions about HOA overreach and property rights. She stammered, tried to deflect, but it was useless. The trap was sprung. My irrefutable, time-stamped proof sealed her fate. The fallout was spectacular. Within days, the city levied an initial fine of $25,000 against the Creekside Commons HOA for the unauthorized demolition of a historic structure and illegal construction. They demanded the immediate removal of the PVC fence and the complete, historically accurate restoration of the fieldstone wall, under the supervision of a licensed historic preservation contractor, the cost of which was estimated to be north of $70,000. My attorney, armed with my meticulous documentation, swiftly filed a civil suit against the HOA and, personally, against Belinda Higgins for property damage, trespass, and emotional distress. The news story went viral, local, and then national. Belinda, in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, called an emergency HOA meeting. It was packed. She tried to frame herself as a victim, but the residents, now fully informed by the news reports and the growing legal mess, were furious. They demanded her resignation. She refused, citing her vision for the community. Then, a surprise. 3 other board members, who had quietly been accumulating their own grievances and were terrified of personal liability, presented a motion for her immediate removal from office. The vote was unanimous, save for Belinda herself. She was escorted out, red-faced and sputtering, by one of the remaining board members. It was deeply satisfying. Update 1. It's been a month since the incident. The city ordered the HOA to pay for all damages and restoration costs. My wall is slowly being meticulously rebuilt by a specialist masonry firm. Belinda's civil suit is progressing. The other board members, thoroughly chastened, have dissolved the architectural authenticity audit and the mailbox standardization initiative. They've even sent me a formal apology letter and offered to cover the costs of my native plant garden's upkeep for a year. I politely declined, but appreciated the gesture. Belinda, I heard, tried to sell her house but couldn't, given the ongoing legal issues and the now infamous Belinda's Folly incident. Her property value plummeted. Update 2. 2 months later, the restoration of my wall is complete. It looks magnificent, indistinguishable from its original state. The city closed its case, satisfied. My civil suit against Belinda and the HOA just settled. I received a significant sum, more than enough to cover my legal fees and any perceived distress. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, but Belinda was found personally liable for a substantial portion due to her unilateral actions and gross negligence. Her house finally sold, but at a loss, and she moved out of Creekside Commons in the dead of night. Good riddance to bad rubbish. Update 3, 6 months on. Creekside Commons is a lot quieter now. The new HOA president is a mild-mannered librarian who actually reads bylaws. I heard through the grapevine that Belinda, having burned through her savings on legal fees, ended up moving back into her mother's basement in that soulless master plan community. She's now reportedly very active in that HOA, already pushing for new, standardized pet waste stations. Some people never learn. But here, the historic wall stands tall, a quiet testament to the power of patience, documentation, and calling out entitlement.